Elvis stopped singing mid-sentence. The microphone hit the stage floor. 15,000 people fell silent. He walked straight toward the security guard who had just stepped onto his stage. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The king of rock and roll was about to break every rule in the book. But how did we get here? How did one of Elvis's most legendary performances turn into a moment that would define his legacy forever? Let me take you back to that night in Las Vegas, 1970. The International Hotel. Elvis was in the middle of his comeback tour, proving to the world that the kid from Memphis still had it. The rhinestone jumpsuit caught the spotlights. The crowd was electric. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. In the third row sat 8-year-old Tommy Martinez. Leukemia. 3 months to live. His mother Maria had saved every penny for 6 months to get him here. This wasn't just a concert for them. This was their miracle night. The night Tommy would see his hero before saying goodbye to the world. Elvis was halfway through, Can't Help Falling in Love, when he spotted Tommy. The kid was trying to sing along, but the chemo had taken his voice. Just whispers. Just hope. His mother held him close, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son try to be strong. The security guard saw Elvis looking toward the crowd. He'd been briefed about crowd control. No interactions. No distractions. Keep the show moving. When he noticed Elvis starting to lean toward the audience, instinct kicked in. He stepped onto the stage. That's when everything changed. Elvis mid-sentence stopped singing. The music died. The crowd held its breath. What happened next would shock everyone in that arena. Subscribe now because what you're about to witness will change how you see the king of rock and roll forever. The security guard's hand reached for Elvis's arm. Sir, please maintain distance from the audience. Hotel policy. Elvis looked at him. Not with anger. Not with frustration. With something deeper. Something that connected to every person who had ever felt powerless watching someone they love suffer. Son, Elvis said, his voice carrying across the silent arena through the microphone feedback, sometimes hotel policy can wait. The guard tightened his grip. Sir, I have my orders. That's when Elvis did something nobody expected. He knelt down. Right there on stage. In front of 15,000 people. He took off his signature scarf, the one he'd worn in hundreds of performances, the one that had become part of his legend. Then you're gonna have to stop me, he said. The arena was dead silent. You could hear hearts beating. The band didn't know whether to play or stop. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or hold their breath. Even the security guard seemed frozen. Elvis stood up slowly. He walked to the edge of the stage, right where Tommy and his mother were sitting. The boy's eyes went wide. This close, Elvis could see everything. The pale skin, the thin frame, the 4 bruise on his arm, and the pure joy fighting through the pain. What's your name, little man? Elvis called out. Tommy, came the whispered response that somehow carried across the entire venue. Elvis smiled that smile. The one that had launched a million dreams. Tommy, you like music? The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. Well, Tommy, I've got something special for you. Behind the stage, Elvis's manager was having a heart attack. The security team was in chaos. But something was happening in that arena that was bigger than any policy, any rule, any protocol. Elvis jumped down from the stage. The crowd gasped. Security guards rushed forward, but Elvis raised his hand. Easy, boys. Just visiting a friend. He walked right up to Tommy's seat. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Cameras flashed. Hearts stopped. Elvis knelt down beside the wheelchair and placed his scarf around Tommy's neck. This scarf has been with me through every show for 3 years, Elvis said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. It's seen every crowd, heard every song, felt every moment. And now it belongs to you. Tommy's mother was sobbing. The boy reached up with shaking hands to touch the scarf. For real. For real, buddy. But I need something from you. What? I need you to help me finish this song. Can you do that? Tommy nodded, finding strength he didn't know he had left. Elvis stood up and addressed the entire arena. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my friend Tommy. And we're gonna finish this song together. The band, understanding the moment, started playing softly. Elvis lifted the boy from his wheelchair. Tommy wrapped his arms around Elvis's neck. And there, in the middle of 15,000 people, they began to sing. Wise men say, only fools rush in. Tommy's voice was weak, but in that moment, it was the strongest sound in the building. The crowd began to join in, quietly at first, then building to something that was more than music. It was healing. It was hope. It was love made audible. But I can't help falling in love with you. What happened next shocked everyone. The security guard who had tried to stop Elvis, this hardened man who'd spent years breaking up fights and maintaining order, he started crying. Right there on stage, tears streaming down his face as he watched the king of rock and roll rewrite the rules of what it meant to be human. Comment below and subscribe if this story is touching your heart, because the most incredible part is still coming. As the song ended, Tommy looked up at Elvis with eyes that held more gratitude than any award, any gold record, any standing ovation could ever convey. Thank you, the boy whispered. Elvis hugged him tighter. Thank you, Tommy. You just reminded me why I do this. The crowd erupted. But it wasn't the usual screaming, frenzied applause. It was something deeper. It was 15,000 people witnessing something sacred. Something that transcended entertainment and touched the divine. Elvis carried Tommy back to his mother, kissed the boy's forehead, and whispered something in his ear that only Tommy would ever know. Then he walked back to the stage, picked up his microphone, and continued the show. But everything had changed. The security guard approached Elvis during the next song break. Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. Elvis put his arm around the man's shoulder. Nothing to be sorry about, friend. You were doing your job. I was doing mine. What's your job? The guard asked. Elvis looked out at the crowd, then back at Tommy, who was glowing with joy in his mother's arms, still wearing the scarf. My job is to remind people that love is stronger than any rule anyone ever wrote. The rest of the concert was different. Elvis sang with more passion, more purpose than anyone had ever seen. The crowd felt it. The band felt it. Something had shifted in the universe, and it all started with a sick little boy and a king who remembered that sometimes, being royal means serving others. Share this story and subscribe if you believe in the power of human kindness, because what happened to Tommy after this night will restore your faith in miracles. After the show, Elvis made sure Tommy and his mother had front row seats for every remaining Vegas show that month. He arranged for the best doctors in the country to review Tommy's case. He sent toys, records, and personal letters to the hospital. But the most incredible thing? Tommy's condition began to improve. The doctors couldn't explain it medically, but his mother knew. She'd witnessed something that night that was bigger than medicine, bigger than science. She'd seen what happens when love meets suffering and refuses to look away. Tommy lived not 3 months, but 3 more years. 3 years filled with Elvis concerts, personal visits, and a friendship that proved that sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is a child who reminds us what matters. The scarf Elvis gave Tommy that night is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Not because it belonged to Elvis, but because it represents something more valuable than fame or fortune. It represents the moment when the king of rock and roll became the king of hearts. Elvis never forgot that night. In interviews afterward, he would say it was the most important performance of his career. Not because of the music, but because of Tommy. The boy who taught him that sometimes, the greatest show on earth happens when you stop performing and start caring. The security guard. He became one of Elvis's closest friends and worked with him until the end. He would often say that the night Elvis broke the rules was the night he learned what rules were really for, not to keep people apart, but to know when love demands we break them. And Tommy? He grew up, became a doctor, and spent his life helping children fight the same battle he once fought. In his office hangs a faded photograph of a little boy in a wheelchair, wearing a rhinestone scarf, in the arms of the king of rock and roll. Every patient who walks into that office learns the same lesson Tommy learned that night in Vegas, that sometimes, when all hope seems lost, a stranger can change everything just by refusing to walk away. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years later, when Tommy was finally declared cancer-free, he wrote Elvis a letter. Not through a fan club or manager, but directly to Graceland. The letter was simple, written in a child's handwriting that had grown stronger over the years. Dear Elvis, it read, I wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I never took off your scarf during any of my treatments. The doctors said it was like having a piece of magic with me. My mom says you saved my life that night, but I think you saved more than that. You saved my hope. Elvis read that letter alone in his room at Graceland, and according to those closest to him, he wept. Not the tears of sadness, but tears of understanding. He finally comprehended what his fame was really for. Not the screaming crowds or the gold records, but moments like these. Moments when music becomes medicine, when performance becomes prayer. He kept Tommy's letter in his Bible for the rest of his life. And every time he stepped onto a stage after that night, he would scan the crowd differently. Not looking for the loudest fans or the prettiest faces, but searching for the Tommies. The ones who needed him most. The ones who came not just to hear music, but to find hope. The ripple effects of that single moment in Las Vegas continued for years. Other performers began incorporating similar moments into their shows. The Elvis rule became an unspoken understanding in the entertainment industry, that sometimes, the show must go on means the show must stop for something more important. The International Hotel, now known as the Las Vegas Hilton, eventually installed a plaque near the stage where it all happened. But the real memorial isn't made of brass or stone. It's in the thousands of lives touched by that simple act of rebellion against protocol, that moment when the king of rock and roll chose to be the king of hearts. Tommy's mother, Maria, would later say in interviews that she witnessed 2 miracles that night. The obvious one was Elvis taking time to comfort her dying son. But the second miracle was quieter, more profound. She saw a man at the height of his fame remember what it felt like to be human. She watched Elvis Presley become more than an entertainer, he became a healer. The security guard who tried to stop Elvis that night, whose name was Robert Williams, eventually wrote a book about his years working with entertainers. He dedicated an entire chapter to that evening, calling it, The Night I Learned the Difference Between Keeping Order and Keeping Faith. He wrote, In my line of work, you learn to see crowds as problems to manage. But Elvis taught me to see them as people to serve. That night, I wasn't just watching a show, I was witnessing ministry. Years later, when Elvis passed away in 1977, thousands gathered at Graceland to pay their respects. Among them was a young man in a doctor's coat, carrying a faded rhinestone scarf. Tommy had kept his promise. He'd become the doctor he dreamed of being, inspired by a night when someone refused to let rules stand in the way of love. He placed the scarf at the gates of Graceland and whispered the same words Elvis had spoken to him 7 years earlier, Thank you. You just reminded me why I do this. The crowd around him didn't know his story, didn't understand the significance of that moment. But Tommy knew. And somewhere, he believed, Elvis knew too. Share this story if you believe that kindness can change the world. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the moments when ordinary people become extraordinary. And remember, we all have the power to be someone's Elvis, someone's miracle, someone's reason to keep fighting. The next time you have the chance to break a rule for love, to stop what you're doing for someone who needs you, to be the hand that reaches out when everyone else walks by, remember Tommy and Elvis, and remember that the most beautiful moments in life happen when we choose compassion over convenience. This is why Elvis will always be the king. Not because he could sing, but because he remembered that every person in every crowd has a story worth stopping for. Subscribe now and share this story. Let's make sure kindness never goes out of style.